The last sound anyone heard was laughter, echoing through Willow Creek's quiet Sunday afternoon, where sprinklers hummed lazily across manicured lawns and the scent of grilled burgers drifted from backyard barbecues. In this picture-perfect neighborhood, where the biggest concern was whose trash bins blocked sidewalks, two little girls vanished without a trace. Emily and Chloe Hayes, just 4 and 3 years old, were playing in their backyard 15 feet from the kitchen window, where their mother Rachel could see them through the glass. She stepped inside for 2 minutes to answer her sister's call, watching the girls through the window as she spoke. When she returned, the swing set swayed empty in the still air, chalk drawings remained untouched on the patio, and an unnatural silence had settled over the yard like a heavy blanket. At first, Rachel thought they had wandered to the front yard, perhaps chasing the neighbor's golden retriever Max, or collecting dandelions from the sidewalk cracks, but the neighbors hadn't seen them, Max hadn't barked, and the front gate remained securely latched. Within 10 minutes, Rachel's voice pierced the suburban tranquility as she screamed their names. Within 20 minutes, the entire block had mobilized into a desperate search. By nightfall, search dogs swept the wooded perimeter, while helicopters circled overhead, with searchlights cutting through the darkness, and county detectives knocked on every door with grim determination. Just like that, Willow Creek transformed from a haven of innocence into a place where parents double-locked their doors and porch lights flickered on like warning beacons, because if it could happen here in this sanctuary of picket fences and bake sales, it could happen anywhere. 4 years had passed since that terrible Sunday, and Detective John Carter hadn't slept peacefully since. The Hayes case haunted him like a phantom limb, the only investigation he'd never been able to release from his grip. He'd been the first responder that night, arriving to find Rachel Hayes collapsed on her knees in the backyard, her voice hoarse from screaming her daughter's names into the void. Carter had searched every inch of Willow Creek with methodical precision, conducting dozens of interviews, combing through dumpsters and drainage ditches, examining attics and crawl spaces, analyzing hundreds of hours of footage from nearby gas stations and grocery stores. The investigation yielded nothing but frustration and sleepless nights. No suspects emerged, no ransom demands arrived, no patterns revealed themselves in the evidence. Some townspeople whispered accusations about the mother, while others blamed human trafficking networks, but most simply stopped talking about it altogether, because silence felt easier than confronting the weight of unanswered questions. Carter never stopped thinking about those girls, even as his promotion to detective had filled him with belief that justice always found a way. That belief had taken severe beatings over the years, leaving bruises on his faith. Some nights he stared at the cold caseboard in his basement and wondered if justice had abandoned Willow Creek entirely. Then Titan arrived like an answer to prayers Carter hadn't known he was praying. The 90-pound German shepherd with amber eyes and a powerful nose had been reassigned to Carter's Canine unit after his military handler retired due to medical issues. On a drizzly Tuesday afternoon in Phaeton, early October, while canvassing neighborhoods for an unrelated missing person report, Titan suddenly froze outside 314 Oak Ridge Avenue, directly across from the old Hayes home. His tail stiffened, ears erected, body lowered into a pointing stance. He didn't bark or growl, but his intense focus on the storm drain between houses sent chills down Carter's spine. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel Canine Loyal Souls, where we uncover true stories of animals' bravery you won't believe until you see. And tell us in the comments, what city are you watching us from? In the heart of America's suburban landscape, where white picket fences frame perfectly manicured lawns and children's laughter typically echoes from playground swings until sunset, darkness sometimes hides behind the most ordinary facades. This is the story of Detective John Carter and his canine partner Titan, a German shepherd whose extraordinary senses would uncover one of the most disturbing criminal networks in modern American history. It began in Willow Creek, a modest neighborhood where the biggest concerns were usually blocked sidewalks and weekend barbecue smoke, but it would evolve into a federal investigation spanning multiple states and revealing a sophisticated underground operation that preyed on society's most vulnerable members. What started as a routine missing persons case 4 years earlier had transformed into something far more sinister, a web of deception wrapped in religious rhetoric and sustained by the silence of stolen children. The Hayes sisters, Emily and Chloe, ages 4 and 3 when they vanished from their backyard during a quiet Sunday afternoon, represented just the visible tip of an iceberg that extended deep into America's forgotten corners. Their disappearance had shattered the illusion of safety that communities like Willow Creek desperately clung to, forcing residents to confront the uncomfortable reality that evil doesn't announce itself with dramatic flourishes or obvious warning signs. Instead, it often wears the mask of normalcy, operating from houses that look exactly like every other house on the block, hidden behind storm drains and basement walls where screams are muffled by insulation and hope withers in darkness. Detective Carter had spent 4 years haunted by the case that refused to close, driven by the memory of Rachel Hayes collapsing in her backyard as she screamed her daughter's names into an empty evening sky. Every lead had evaporated like morning mist. Every potential suspect had alibis. Every theory crumbled under scrutiny. The investigation had consumed him, transforming his basement into an unofficial command center where cold case files accumulated like autumn leaves and sleepless nights blurred into exhausted days. Then Titan arrived, a military-trained German shepherd with amber eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical world into realms where secrets hide and truth waits patiently to be discovered. Their partnership would prove that sometimes the most important voices are the ones that never speak at all, communicating instead through instinct, loyalty, and an unwavering determination to protect those who cannot protect themselves. This is their story, a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of listening to subtle signs that others might dismiss, and the unbreakable bond between human and canine partners who refuse to abandon hope even when justice seems impossibly distant. In the pages that follow, you'll witness how one dog's acute senses would crack open a case that had baffled investigators for years, revealing not just the fate of 2 missing girls, but an entire network of predators who had operated in plain sight, protected by society's tendency to look away from uncomfortable truths and trust in appearances that deceive. October's chill had settled over Willow Creek like a familiar blanket, painting the maple trees in brilliant shades of amber and crimson, while the afternoon sun cast long shadows across quiet residential streets. Detective John Carter guided his patrol cruiser through the neighborhood with practiced ease, Titan sitting alert in the passenger seat, his German shepherd ears rotating like radar dishes as they responded to a routine welfare check on Elmwood Drive. The call had come in that morning from a concerned daughter who hadn't heard from her elderly father in 3 days, a standard request that usually resulted in finding someone who had simply forgotten to charge their phone or had been napping when relatives called. Carter had handled dozens of these checks over the years, most ending with embarrassed apologies and promises to call more frequently. But as they turned onto Oak Ridge Avenue, something shifted in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm, when birds suddenly stop singing and dogs begin to pace restlessly. Titan's behavior changed first, his relaxed posture stiffening as his nose lifted toward the open window, nostrils flaring as he processed scents that carried information invisible to human senses. The German shepherd's training had been honed through years of military service, where his ability to detect explosives, track enemies, and sense danger had saved countless lives in hostile territories across Afghanistan and Iraq. His reassignment to civilian canine duty should have been a peaceful retirement, but Titan's instincts remained as sharp as surgical steel, attuned to frequencies of wrongness that most people never learn to recognize. When Carter parked the cruiser outside the house they were meant to check, Titan remained seated, but his entire body had transformed into a statue of concentrated attention, every muscle fiber focused on something beyond their intended destination. His amber eyes fixed on 314 Oak Ridge Avenue across the street, the house where Walter Darrow lived alone behind drawn curtains and an overgrown front yard that suggested its occupant preferred isolation to community interaction. Carter followed Titan's gaze to the unremarkable single-story home with faded blue siding and white trim that needed repainting, a structure so ordinary it seemed to blend into the landscape like protective camouflage. The house sat directly across from where the Hayes family had once lived, where Rachel still maintained the girl's bedroom exactly as it had been on that terrible Sunday 4 years ago, hoping against hope that Emily and Chloe might somehow find their way home to familiar surroundings and unchanged sheets that still held faint traces of their childhood scents. Carter had driven past this intersection countless times during the original investigation, canvassing every neighbor, interviewing every resident, searching every basement and attic in a 3-block radius. Walter Darrow had been questioned like everyone else, presenting himself as a retired high school mathematics teacher who lived quietly on his pension and volunteered occasionally at the local library helping children with homework assignments. His background check had revealed nothing suspicious, no criminal record, no complaints from neighbors, no red flags that might have suggested involvement in anything more sinister than occasional late-night television viewing that sometimes disturbed adjacent residents. Titan's behavior escalated from alert attention to something approaching obsession as Carter completed the welfare check on the elderly gentleman who had simply been visiting his sister in the next town without informing his worried daughter. The routine call resolved quickly, with relieved phone conversations and promises of better communication, but Titan refused to settle back into his usual patrol posture as they prepared to leave Oak Ridge Avenue. Instead, the German Shepherd's focus intensified on Walter Darrow's property, his body language shifting into the hunting stance Carter had witnessed during their most challenging searches through dense forests and abandoned buildings where missing persons cases had led them into darkness, both literal and metaphorical. When Carter attempted to guide Titan back toward the patrol car, the dog planted his feet firmly on the sidewalk and turned his massive head toward the storm drain that separated Darrow's property from his neighbor's driveway, a concrete opening partially hidden by overgrown grass and autumn leaves that had accumulated in the gutter throughout the season. Titan's nose worked methodically as he processed airborne molecules that carried stories invisible to human perception, his nostrils flaring with the precision of a scientific instrument calibrated to detect traces of life, death, fear, and secrets buried beneath layers of time and deliberate concealment. The storm drain itself appeared unremarkable, a standard municipal feature designed to channel rainwater away from residential streets during heavy precipitation, but Titan's reaction suggested it contained information that demanded immediate investigation. Carter knelt beside his Canine partner and watched as Titan circled the drainage opening 3 times before sitting in the formal alert position that indicated discovery of significant evidence, a behavior pattern drilled into the dog through thousands of hours of training, where success meant the difference between life and death for missing persons whose time was measured in heartbeats rather than days. The German Shepherd's amber eyes never wavered from their target as Carter examined the storm drain opening, noting nothing unusual in the concrete structure that had probably been installed decades earlier when the neighborhood was first developed and families began moving into houses that promised safety, community, and the American dream of suburban tranquility. Yet Titan's unwavering attention transformed the ordinary drainage system into something ominous, a portal that might connect to underground passages where darkness accumulated like stagnant water and secrets fermented in isolation until they became toxic enough to poison entire communities. Carter's radio crackled with routine dispatches as other officers responded to fender benders and noise complaints throughout their jurisdiction, but he found himself unable to focus on anything except Titan's absolute certainty that this particular location contained evidence worth investigating, despite the absence of visible proof that would justify official action. The dog's military training had taught him to trust canine instincts that operated beyond human understanding, recognizing patterns and detecting anomalies that escaped conventional investigation techniques, even when those instincts contradicted logical analysis or procedural requirements. Carter's decision to approach Walter Darrow's front door carried the weight of 4 years of unanswered questions and Titan's unwavering conviction that secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of suburban normalcy. The detective's boots crunched softly on fallen leaves as he crossed the street with Titan at his side, the German Shepherd's controlled energy radiating through the leather leash like electricity through copper wire. The house at 314 Oak Ridge Avenue presented itself as aggressively ordinary, its faded blue siding and white trim suggesting benign neglect rather than deliberate concealment. But Carter had learned through years of investigation that the most dangerous predators often camouflaged themselves within landscapes of predictable mediocrity. When Carter's knuckles rapped against the wooden door, the sound echoed through what seemed like an empty house before slow, shuffling footsteps approached from within, each step deliberate and measured, as if the occupant was carefully considering whether to acknowledge the visitor's presence. Walter Darrow opened the door slowly, revealing a slight man in his late 60s wearing a thick cardigan despite the afternoon warmth, his wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose as he blinked owlishly at the unexpected presence of law enforcement on his doorstep. His appearance suggested fragility and harmlessness, the kind of elderly gentleman who might help customers reach high shelves at grocery stores or offer directions to lost tourists with patient politeness. Carter introduced himself professionally, explaining that they were conducting routine neighborhood checks following a welfare report nearby and requesting permission for Titan to perform a brief sweep of the property, a standard procedure that most residents accepted without question or concern. Darrow's response came after a noticeable pause, his fingers tightening slightly on the doorframe as his pale eyes shifted between Carter's badge and Titan's alert posture, calculating risks and responses with the careful precision of someone accustomed to maintaining facades under pressure. His voice carried the measured tone of a retired educator as he declined the request, citing illness and a preference for privacy that seemed reasonable enough to prevent Carter from pressing the issue without probable cause that extended beyond canine intuition. Yet something in Darrow's demeanor suggested layers beneath the surface, a careful control that felt rehearsed rather than natural, as if he had prepared for this moment through mental exercises designed to project innocence while concealing deeper truths. Titan remained focused on the storm drain throughout the brief interaction, his attention never wavering from the concrete opening that had triggered his initial alert, behavior that Carter filed away for future consideration despite the absence of legal justification for further investigation. The detective's training emphasized the importance of respecting citizens' rights while gathering information through observation and patience, recognizing that premature action often destroyed cases that might have been solved through methodical persistence and attention to details that seemed insignificant until they formed patterns revealing larger truths. That night brought an October chill that seemed to penetrate Carter's bones as he sat in his kitchen reviewing case files, while Titan rested in his designated sleeping area near the back door, the German shepherds breathing steady and deep in what should have been peaceful slumber after their routine patrol shift. Carter had installed a secure kennel system in his backyard where Titan could exercise and relax during off-duty hours, a setup that had functioned without incident for months since their partnership began, providing both dog and handler with necessary space to decompress from the psychological pressures of their demanding work. The kennel's electronic latch system required deliberate manipulation to open, a safety feature designed to prevent accidental escapes while allowing emergency access if circumstances demanded immediate release from confinement. Carter had tested the mechanism repeatedly during installation, confirming that even an intelligent dog like Titan couldn't accidentally trigger the sophisticated locking mechanism that required precise pressure applied in a specific sequence to disengage the security protocol. Yet sometime after midnight, as Carter dozed over case reports at his kitchen table, Titan managed to slip the latch through methods that defied logical explanation, emerging from his enclosure without triggering any of the motion sensors or alarm systems that should have alerted Carter to unauthorized movement in the backyard. The detective awoke to silence more profound than usual, an absence of sound that felt pregnant with significance as his unconscious mind processed the missing rhythm of Titan's breathing from the kennel area. Carter's search of the house revealed empty rooms and an open back door that he distinctly remembered locking before settling down to review files, but no sign of his canine partner anywhere within the familiar boundaries of home territory. Panic gripped Carter's chest as he considered the possibilities that might explain Titan's disappearance, ranging from theft by criminals seeking to eliminate a threat to their operations to simple wanderlust that might have overcome the dog's usually impeccable discipline and training. The detective grabbed his flashlight and service weapon before venturing into the pre-dawn darkness of suburban streets where streetlights created pools of illumination, separated by stretches of shadow that could conceal any number of threats or explanations for his missing partner. Carter's search led him through familiar neighborhoods where residents slept peacefully behind locked doors, unaware that a highly trained military dog was wandering free among their carefully maintained properties and manicured gardens. The trail of Titan's passage became evident through disturbed flower beds and displaced lawn ornaments that marked his path through the residential maze, leading Carter on a route that seemed purposeful rather than random as it wound through streets and alleyways toward a destination that the dog had apparently selected with deliberate intention rather than instinctual wandering. Carter's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he followed Titan's trail toward the inevitable destination that his intuition had already predicted, each step confirming what his mind had refused to accept until confronted with undeniable evidence of his partner's supernatural determination to pursue leads that transcended human understanding. The path led directly back to Oak Ridge Avenue, where Carter found Titan positioned like a sentinel beside the same storm drain that had captured his attention earlier that afternoon, the German Shepherd's massive form silhouetted against the pale glow of distant streetlights as he maintained his vigil with unwavering focus. This time, however, Titan's behavior had escalated beyond mere alertness into something approaching aggression, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest as his amber eyes fixed on shadows that seemed to shift and move within the drainage opening despite the absence of any visible threat or disturbance. Carter approached slowly, recognizing the signs of extreme agitation in his partner's posture, the way Titan's hackles stood erect along his spine, while his powerful muscles coiled like springs, ready to unleash devastating force against whatever presence had triggered this primal response to danger. The storm drain itself remained visually unchanged from their earlier inspection, a concrete mouth partially obscured by accumulated debris and overgrown vegetation. But something about the location had transformed in Carter's perception as he witnessed Titan's absolute conviction that evil lurked beneath the surface of suburban normalcy. The detective's radio remained silent in the pre-dawn hours when most criminal activity subsided and patrol officers dealt primarily with domestic disturbances and traffic violations, leaving Carter alone with his thoughts and growing certainty that Titan had detected evidence of crimes that extended far beyond simple neighborhood mischief or teenage vandalism. Walter Darrow's house loomed across the street like a sleeping giant, its windows dark and curtains drawn against prying eyes, presenting the same facade of benign ordinariness that had allowed it to blend invisibly into the residential landscape for years while concealing secrets that festered in darkness like infected wounds. Carter found himself studying the property with new eyes, searching for details that might have escaped notice during previous investigations, noting the precise alignment of window coverings that blocked all external observation and the absence of normal household indicators like outdoor lighting or seasonal decorations that suggested active occupancy. Titan's growling intensified as a barely perceptible breeze carried scents. Through the storm drain opening, molecules of information that told stories of fear, confinement and human suffering that had been trapped underground like poisonous gases, accumulating in abandoned mines until they became toxic enough to kill anyone who ventured too close to their source. The dog's military training had exposed him to battlefields where death and violence left indelible impressions on sensitive nostrils capable of distinguishing between the metallic tang of fresh blood and the sweet decay of corpses that had been hidden for weeks in mass graves that enemy forces hoped would never be discovered by advancing troops. Carter's return to the precinct that morning carried the weight of sleepless conviction as he began the delicate process of transforming Titan's inexplicable behavior into legal justification for official investigation, knowing that judges required evidence more substantial than canine intuition, regardless of how accurate those instincts might prove to be in practice. The detective spent hours reviewing building permits and property records for 314 Oak Ridge Avenue, discovering discrepancies in construction documents that suggested Walter Darrow had made unauthorized modifications to his basement structure 2 years earlier, work that had been completed by an out-of-state contractor whose business license had since expired, and whose forwarding address led to a post office box that had been abandoned without notice. Neighbors' complaints about strange noises emanating from Darrow's property had been dismissed as the normal sounds of an aging house settling on its foundation, but Carter's review of police reports revealed a pattern of disturbances that included dragging sounds, muffled crying, and what one witness described as children's laughter that seemed to echo from underground sources at odd hours of the night. The accumulation of circumstantial evidence created a foundation for probable cause that Carter presented to Judge Margaret Thornfield, a veteran jurist known for her careful consideration of constitutional rights, balanced against public safety concerns, particularly in cases involving missing children where time constraints often demanded immediate action despite incomplete information. Carter's presentation emphasized the connection between Titan's alert behavior and the unsolved Hayes sisters case, arguing that 4 years of failed investigation justified exploring every possible lead, regardless of how unconventional the source of information might appear to conventional law enforcement methodology. Judge Thornfield listened patiently as Carter described Titan's military background and proven track record of detecting hidden evidence in combat situations where human lives depended on canine accuracy. Recognizing that canine units had established legal precedent for initiating searches based on trained animal responses to stimuli that remained invisible to human perception. The warrant application included detailed documentation of building permit irregularities, neighbor complaints, and Titan's specific behavioral indicators that suggested the presence of evidence related to criminal activity, creating a legal framework that would withstand appellate scrutiny if the search produced actionable results. Carter left the courthouse with signed authorization to conduct a comprehensive search of Walter Darrow's property, including all structures, outbuildings, and underground areas that might contain evidence related to the disappearance of Emily and Chloe Hayes or any other criminal activity that had occurred on the premises during the past 5 years. The warrant specified early morning execution to minimize potential destruction of evidence while ensuring adequate backup support from additional officers who could secure the scene and process any discoveries according to proper forensic protocols that would preserve chain of custody for eventual prosecution. Carter spent the evening before the search reviewing tactical procedures with his team, studying blueprints of the property's layout and preparing equipment that might be needed for excavation or structural penetration if hidden chambers were discovered beneath the house's foundation. Dawn arrived grey and restless over Oak Ridge Avenue as Detective Carter positioned his team outside 314 with the methodical precision of a military operation, each officer understanding that this moment represented the culmination of 4 years of investigation and countless sleepless nights spent wondering if justice would ever find Emily and Chloe Hayes. The morning air carried autumn's bite as Carter stood on damp grass with Titan at his side, the German shepherd's body tense with anticipation as his nose twitched toward the house where Walter Darrow presumably slept, behind drawn curtains, unaware that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble under the weight of accumulated evidence and canine determination. Behind them, uniformed officers waited with tactical equipment including crowbars, flashlights, and evidence collection materials, while a paramedic unit stood ready to respond to whatever horrors might be discovered within the structure that had masqueraded as an ordinary suburban home for years. Across the street, porch curtains twitched as neighbors emerged with coffee cups to witness what most assumed would be a routine drug bust or domestic disturbance, their innocent curiosity unable to comprehend that they were about to witness the resolution of their community's darkest mystery and the exposure of evil that had operated in plain sight while they went about their daily lives. Carter's knock on the front door echoed through what seemed like an empty house before slow shuffling footsteps approached from within, each step deliberate and measured, as if Darrow was carefully composing himself for a performance that he had rehearsed countless times in preparation for this inevitable confrontation. When the door opened, Walter Darrow appeared smaller and more fragile than Carter remembered, his pale complexion and hollow cheeks suggesting someone who spent most of his time indoors away from natural sunlight, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the morning sky as he blinked with apparent confusion at the presence of multiple law enforcement officers on his doorstep. His voice carried the same measured tone of polite cooperation that had deflected suspicion during previous encounters, but Carter detected subtle changes in his demeanor that suggested carefully controlled panic beneath the surface of manufactured calm. The search warrant's legal language meant nothing to Darrow's victims, but it represented hope for families who had spent years wondering if their missing children were alive or dead, and whether justice would ever penetrate the shadows where predators operated with impunity. Titan didn't wait for formal authorization before bolting through the open doorway, his powerful frame moving with purpose as he navigated the house's interior toward destinations that his enhanced senses had already mapped through months of detecting airborne molecules that carried stories of suffering and confinement. The interior smelled of bleach and artificial air fresheners, chemical signatures that suggested deliberate efforts to eliminate organic traces that might reveal the true nature of activities conducted within these walls. The house's interior presented itself as aggressively normal, with furniture arrangements and decorative choices that seemed calculated to project the image of a harmless elderly bachelor living quietly on his pension. But Titan's behavior indicated that surface appearances concealed deeper truths that required immediate investigation. Every room had been cleaned with obsessive thoroughness that went beyond ordinary housekeeping into territory that suggested evidence destruction, surfaces scrubbed with industrial-strength chemicals that burned the nostrils and created an antiseptic environment more appropriate for medical facilities than residential living spaces. Carter followed Titan through the living room, where outdated furniture sat arranged in perfect symmetry, past a kitchen where canned goods lined pantry shelves with military precision, toward areas where the German shepherd's nose led him with unwavering confidence, towards secrets that human eyes couldn't detect. When Titan stopped, abruptly in front of the pantry, and assumed his formal alert position, Carter knew that years of searching were about to culminate in discovery that would either validate his obsession with the Hayes case or destroy his credibility as an investigator who had allowed canine instincts to override logical analysis. The pantry appeared unremarkable at first glance, its shelves stocked with dry goods and canned foods arranged in rows that suggested compulsive organization rather than normal household management. But Carter's careful examination revealed scuff marks on the floor that indicated recent movement of heavy objects across surfaces that should have remained undisturbed. Officer Martinez began removing items from the shelves, while Carter ran his fingers along the interior paneling, searching for irregularities in construction that might indicate hidden mechanisms or concealed openings that could provide access to areas not shown on official building plans. The discovery came with a subtle click as Carter's fingertips found a recessed handle hidden behind a false panel, the mechanism operating with smooth precision that suggested frequent use rather than emergency construction, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. The smell that emerged from the opening carried information that made Carter's stomach lurch with recognition of human suffering that had been trapped underground like poisonous gases accumulating in abandoned mines, a mixture of unwashed bodies, damp earth, and fear that had fermented in isolation until it became a toxic signature of prolonged captivity. Titan's growl intensified as his enhanced senses processed airborne molecules that told stories of children who had been hidden from the world in spaces designed to muffle screams and absorb hope until nothing remained except acceptance of circumstances that no child should ever be forced to endure. The narrow staircase led down into depths that seemed to extend far beyond what should have been possible given the house's foundation, suggesting construction that had been deliberately concealed from building inspectors and neighbors who might have questioned unauthorized excavation. Carter's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as the search team descended into a basement that defied every assumption about suburban construction, revealing a windowless chamber that had been engineered for concealment and control with the precision of someone who understood that evil required infrastructure to sustain itself over extended periods. The concrete walls showed evidence of professional construction that extended far beyond amateur modifications, with insulation layers designed to absorb sound and ventilation systems that provided just enough air circulation to sustain life without allowing voices to escape to the surface where neighbors might hear cries for help during quiet evening hours. 2 small mattresses lay on the floor, like abandoned islands in an ocean of despair, their stained surfaces telling stories of years spent in captivity, while toys scattered around the room suggested attempts to create normalcy within circumstances that no child should ever be forced to endure. Crayon drawings covered one wall with the desperate artistry of children who had been denied access to sunlight and fresh air, their colorful images depicting houses with smoking chimneys and smiling families that existed only in memories that grew fainter with each passing day of underground imprisonment. In the far corner, beneath a threadbare blanket that might have once provided comfort, but now served as camouflage, 2 small forms huddled together with the instinctive protection that siblings develop when facing circumstances beyond their comprehension or control. Emily and Chloe Hayes, now 8 and 7 years old, blinked in the harsh glare of police flashlights with eyes that had adapted to perpetual darkness, their pale skin bearing the translucent quality of creatures that had been denied natural sunlight for years, while their bodies developed in an artificial environment designed to sustain life without allowing growth or escape. Carter's voice caught in his throat as he knelt beside the girls who represented the successful conclusion of an investigation that had consumed 4 years of his life. But their condition suggested that rescue was only the beginning of a healing process that might require decades to complete. The older girl, Emily, wrapped her arms protectively around her sister's shoulders with movements that spoke of practiced routine, her hollow eyes reflecting intelligence that had been forced to mature beyond its years while adapting to circumstances that challenged every assumption about childhood resilience and human adaptability. They didn't cry or scream with relief, as Carter had expected rescued children might react, instead maintaining the careful silence that had been enforced. Through years of conditioning that transformed natural responses into dangerous behaviors that might provoke punishment from their captor, their skeletal frames and matted hair provided physical evidence of prolonged neglect, but their psychological condition remained hidden beneath surface compliance that suggested adaptation strategies developed over time to survive circumstances that would have destroyed weaker spirits. Walter Darrow stood in handcuffs beside the patrol car with an expression of eerily calm acceptance, his mild-mannered facade finally stripped away to reveal the calculating predator who had operated beneath the surface of suburban respectability for years while perfecting techniques of psychological manipulation that transformed kidnapping into something resembling voluntary compliance from his victims. His voice carried the same measured tone of polite conversation as he explained to shocked officers that the girls belonged to him now, that God had delivered them into his care when their mother failed to protect them adequately, and that his basement sanctuary had provided better nurturing than the chaotic world above ground, where children faced dangers far worse than isolation and silence. The paramedics who loaded Emily and Chloe into ambulances worked with professional efficiency that masked their emotional response to conditions that challenged their experience with trauma cases, their gentle movements and soothing voices attempting to counteract years of conditioning that had taught the girls to fear sudden noises and unexpected physical contact from strangers who claimed to represent rescue rather than additional threat. Carter watched from the sidewalk as news vans began arriving to document the resolution of a case that had captured public attention through its combination of suburban setting and inexplicable disappearance, their cameras capturing images that would transform Willow Creek from anonymous neighborhood into national symbol of hidden dangers that lurked behind ordinary facades. The crowd of neighbors who gathered to witness Darrow's arrest displayed expressions ranging from shocked disbelief to retrospective recognition of warning signs that they had dismissed as harmless eccentricity, their comfortable assumptions about community safety shattered by the revelation that evil had operated within their midst while they went about their daily routines of work, school, and weekend barbecues. Rachel Hayes arrived at the hospital 2 hours after receiving the phone call that every parent of missing children dreams of yet fears to hope for. Her emotional collapse upon seeing daughters who had become strangers during their years of captivity, representing the complex reality that rescue doesn't automatically restore relationships that trauma has fundamentally altered. The girls' reaction to their mother revealed the psychological damage that extended beyond physical neglect into realms where identity itself had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to their captor's twisted theology. Their recognition of Rachel limited to vague memories that felt like half-remembered dreams rather than foundational relationships that should have anchored their developing personalities. Carter's sense of victory was tempered by understanding that Darrow's arrest represented only the beginning of a legal process that would require months of investigation to uncover the full extent of his crimes and their impact on victims whose voices had been silenced through years of conditioning that transformed resistance into compliance. 3 weeks after Emily and Chloe's rescue, FBI agent Lillian Reyes arrived at Carter's precinct, carrying evidence that transformed a local kidnapping case into a federal investigation, spanning multiple states and revealing a sophisticated network of predators who had operated under the cover of religious devotion for decades. The analysis of Walter Darrow's personal effects had uncovered connections to a defunct compound in northern Arizona called the Ark of Divine Protection, where former members described training programs designed to teach adherents how to identify vulnerable children and create underground sanctuaries where victims could be conditioned to accept captivity as divine protection from a corrupt world. Darrow's visitor logs from 1996 showed a 9-day stay at the compound where he had learned techniques of psychological manipulation that combined religious rhetoric with sensory deprivation to break down children's resistance and rebuild their identities according to twisted theological frameworks that justified kidnapping as salvation. The basement crawl space behind Darrow's water heater contained journals filled with passages that revealed his belief system, where he positioned himself as a shepherd, protecting innocent lambs from wolves, while documenting his victims' progress toward what he termed spiritual purification. Through isolation and silence, Emily's recovered memories provided crucial details about other locations she had glimpsed during brief moments when Darrow transported supplies or conducted mysterious rituals in areas beyond their underground prison, descriptions that helped investigators identify a network of similar facilities hidden beneath abandoned churches, failed orphanages, and remote religious retreats across the American Southwest. The discovery of prayer cards in Darrow's possession revealed his participation in a cottage industry where kidnapped children were forced to write responses to spiritual requests submitted by unwitting donors who believed they were receiving divine guidance through legitimate religious channels rather than supporting criminal enterprises that exploited stolen innocence for financial gain. Federal raids on properties connected to the original Arizona compound resulted in the recovery of 17 additional children, some who had been missing for over a decade, while others had never been reported missing because they had been taken from foster care systems or homeless populations where their absence went unnoticed by overwhelmed social services agencies. The investigation revealed that Darrow represented just one cell in a larger organization that had perfected techniques of operating beneath the radar of law enforcement while maintaining the appearance of legitimate religious activity that attracted donations from communities seeking spiritual comfort during uncertain times. Carter's role in exposing the network earned him recognition from federal agencies, but his primary satisfaction came from knowing that Titan's determination to investigate a single storm drain had unraveled criminal operations that might have continued indefinitely without canine intervention that transcended human investigative capabilities. 6 months after the rescue that transformed Willow Creek from a community haunted by unanswered questions into a symbol of hope and persistence, Emily and Chloe Hayes had begun the long journey toward healing, while their story inspired changes in missing persons protocols that emphasized the importance of following unconventional leads when traditional investigation methods reached dead ends. The girls' recovery progressed slowly but steadily under the care of trauma specialists, who understood that rebuilding trust and identity required patience and consistency rather than expectations of rapid transformation, their therapeutic breakthroughs often coinciding with visits from Titan, whose presence seemed to provide comfort that human caregivers couldn't replicate through conventional treatment approaches. Rachel Hayes returned to something resembling normal life while maintaining vigilance against the lingering effects of trauma that manifested in unexpected ways. Her daughter's gradual emergence from psychological captivity requiring constant adaptation to needs and fears that evolved. As their memories became clearer and their understanding of their experiences deepened, Detective Carter received commendations and media attention that he deflected toward Titan, whose instincts had initiated the investigation that ultimately saved dozens of children from ongoing abuse while exposing a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years by exploiting society's tendency to dismiss subtle warning signs as harmless eccentricity. The demolition of 314 Oak Ridge Avenue eliminated the physical structure where unspeakable crimes had occurred, but the psychological impact of its revelations continued to resonate through communities across the nation, where parents began paying closer attention to neighbors whose behavior seemed slightly off or whose homes felt somehow wrong despite the absence of obvious evidence to justify suspicion. Titan's retirement from active duty came with full honors and a pension funded by donations from grateful families whose lives had been touched by his service, but he remained alert to dangers that might threaten the children he had helped rescue, his protective instincts extending beyond professional duty into personal commitment that transcended the boundaries between human and canine partnerships. The listener network trials resulted in dozens of convictions and life sentences for predators who had hidden behind religious rhetoric, while systematically destroying the lives of vulnerable children. Their exposure serving as a warning to similar organizations that law enforcement agencies had developed new techniques for detecting crimes that previously went unnoticed because they operated in shadows where screams were muffled and hope withered in darkness. Yet questions remained about how many other networks might still operate in forgotten corners of American society, their victims trapped in basement prisons or remote compounds where silence is enforced through fear and isolation, waiting for someone like Titan to hear what human ears cannot detect and refuse to abandon the search for truth even when logic suggests that hope is futile and justice is beyond reach. And you, what did you think about this story? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos.